When I was about 9 years old, a swarm of bees showed up in my father's front yard. Everybody's seen a swarm? Big ball of bees hanging on a bush, usually about the size of a basketball. All right? It showed up in my father's front yard. I was 9 years old. We didn't have the internet back then, so my father did have a pretty comprehensive library. So I went in and I pulled the Encyclopedia Britannica off the shelf and started looking up bees and swarms and all this stuff. And while I was reading, my father called a beekeeper. His name was Dr. Weddle. He lived right around the block here, and I lived in pretty much the same neighborhood. He came over and to collect this swarm of bees. He said, "You want to keep them?" And I was thinking, oh, that's really cool. And so he set up an apiary, not dissimilar to this one here. We put them in the box. And back then, beekeeping was pretty simple and pretty straightforward. You could throw bees in a box and leave them alone, and they did what they had done for 20 million years. Things changed, and have changed, and continue to change. In about 1990, the varroa mite was introduced.
Now I have one here. Can you help me to get this out of my hair? More here, somewhere here. On this side. I can. Still there. Still there.
There she is.
Thank you.
I got one too.
That's a little
I
unusual.
like to go in the hair.
Yeah, they do. If they're going to do anything, they're going to get caught in your hair. She didn't get you, did she?
Did you?
No, no, no.
Okay.
Oh, I would scream.
Yeah. Anyway, we put the bees in the hive. Things changed in the early 90s. And usually, the big change was the introduction of the varroa mite. Varroa mite was introduced from Asia. It actually came from the Korean Peninsula. And it is a parasitic mite. It's about the size of a flea. It looks like a little red crab. It sucks the hemolymph from the bees. Hemolymph is the bee's equivalent to blood. Now, they don't have a circulatory system like you and I, but the hemolymph has the same function. It will spread, distribute oxygen and nutrients throughout the body. Okay? It opens up sores in the bees, it spreads pathogens, and it really started to hit our bees hard about 1990. They are now worldwide. If you're going to have bees, you're going to have varroa mite. So we do a lot to manage those varroa mites. Other things changed just recently. In about 2005, we started to see a really big die-off of bees. Those bees, we think, are suffering from a lot more than the varroa mite. And there's so many things out there. They keep looking for this magic thing called CCD, and they're looking for a silver bullet. In my opinion, it's not out there. That realistically what we're looking at is a whole cocktail of things, and I like to talk about 4 Ps. First one is, we've already talked about, is parasites. And there's a number of parasites, including the varroa mite. Number 2 is pathogens. Pathogens include 2 types of foul brood. Nosema cerana, the Israeli acute paralysis virus, any number of pathogens that get to our bees, and those mites help spread those pathogens. Pesticides is the 3rd P. A particular concern right now is a pesticide called a neonicotinoid. It's being looked at very carefully as a leading cause of colony collapse disorder. What the neonicotinoid is a nicotine derivative. It is an endocrine disruptor. It affects the bee's ability to fight off disease. So this is a lot like AIDS, in a way. It depletes the bee's immune system. It leaves them susceptible to all these pathogens out there. And those pathogens are also spread by the varroa mite. So you've got this cocktail going on. Finally, there's other pests killing bees. I lost at least 2 colonies this year to wasps, yellow jackets. They can invade a hive, do a lot of damage. Throw in ants. Hive back here, we saw a few small hive beetle today. They're not terribly damaging, but they're devastating hives in Hawaii. Wax moth. What else is out there? There's a number of other pests affecting our bees. And so when they talk about colony collapse disorder, it's not just one thing. It's a whole cocktail of things, in my opinion. And they're really killing our bees in large numbers. I lose about half my bees every year. Some very good beekeepers are losing up to 80% of their bees every single year. Okay? The good news is you guys. People are taking, because of these symptoms and colony collapse disorder, beekeeping is getting a lot of public attention. People are getting interested. They're taking a personal interest in the bees. And the more of us who are taking a personal interest in the bees, the better. We have many more backyard beekeepers, and as a result, bees are starting to repopulate. I'll call it the wild, but bees are not native, so they're not really a wild species, not here in the United States. But they're becoming, starting to repopulate our trees and feral colonies out there, and they're making a pretty good resurgence. And the thing is, with hobbyist beekeepers keeping 1 or 2 hives in their backyard, we're not crowding the bees into an agricultural situation. We need our commercial beekeepers to pollinate our crops. But the downside of that is because they have all these bees in such a concentrated area, they share all these pathogens and pests and get exposed to pesticides all at the same time, and it's not necessarily good for our bees. So hobbyists are really helping reintroduce bees into our neighborhoods, and that's why I got started back here. About 6 years ago, my wife says, our fruit trees aren't producing. We're not seeing bees in the garden. Can we get a beehive? I said, sure we can. And so we went up to Marin to a company, I think it was called Beekind, up in Marin. They set us up with a single apiary. It was all set and ready to go. It was one box, pretty much all set up. We drove up to Marin. We put these bees in the back of our Subaru station wagon. Okay? We sealed the entrance closed. I swear those bees were going to get up. Come on in and make yourselves comfortable, folks. I knew those bees were all going to come out of that box somewhere over the middle of the Golden Gate Bridge. And bees, beekeepers, Subaru and all were going to go off the side of the bridge. Well, we made it. And we've been keeping bees here in the backyard for about the last 6 years. We have great neighbors. We ply them liberally with honey. And we don't have too many problems. Rarely, if things get really wild back here, one neighbor will call and say, oh, you know, the bees are getting a little bit crazy and we'll do something about it. Worst thing that happens is they swarm. They'll end up in the neighbor's tree. They call and they say, will you come get your bees? Most of the time I can trap them before they get that far. But occasionally I have to go over to the neighbor's house and collect a few thousand bees.
How do you collect them?
I collect them in a bucket, and we're going to talk about that a bit. It's collecting swarms. But I have a gas. I love what I do. I try to make a living at it. I specialize in producing local honey. Okay? Honey is magic stuff. So is all the things that come out of my beehives. In fact, there's 2, if you take this home. Honey, particularly local honey, is very good for your allergies. It's very good for your digestion, especially if it's raw. It's full of live enzymes. And then you get things like this. This is pollen. This pollen came from Portola Valley. Pollen is full of protein, full of amino acids, antioxidants. It's very good for your energy. It's also good for treating your hay fever. Then you get propolis. Propolis is interesting stuff. When I start prying apart the beehive, you're going to notice everything's kind of glued together. And what's holding it together is propolis. It's bee glue. It's basically plant resins from all over the neighborhood. They're looking at propolis right now as a treatment for certain types of cancers. In fact, one of my lady friends, Nahala, who's a masseuse, she's from Eastern Europe. She claims she cured her grandfather of cancer using propolis, and they are studying it for the treatment of certain types of cancer. I sell most of my propolis to people with horses, and they use it on the horse's hooves as a preventative for hoof rot. You doing okay? Is it getting better or worse?
Just a little shocked.
Okay, let's make sure we keep an eye on her. So the stuff that comes out of a beehive is magic, even a bee sting. My wife had arthritis in one of her thumbs, and it was keeping her awake at night. She got stung on the thumb. She's never had arthritis since. Go figure. Is it a placebo? Does it really work? There's very little scientific evidence, but as Americans, we've lost a lot of touch with holistic medicines. And in Europe, in New Zealand, where my wife is from, they're all into that. It's starting to come back here in the United States. I sell about 80% of my honey for people with hay fever. And I would tell you that it works for about 80% of those people. So it's magic stuff. I don't call it a really medicine because there's no real medical evidence that it works. Is it a placebo? I don't know. But if it works, use it. So I love what I do. I think it's great for you. And I love teaching. This is a lot of fun for me. So let's start by just kind of showing you some of the equipment that we use to keep our bees. This is a Langstroth hive. It was invented in about the 1850s by Lorenzo Langstroth. Lorenzo Langstroth discovered bee space. And bee space basically says that any space less than 3/8 of an inch, bees will pack propolis into it. If it's more than 3/8 of an inch, they'll fill it with wax. By taking that principle, he designed the Langstroth hive, which essentially uses frames. Inside the hive, you've got frames. Before we had frames, basically we had hives that were skeps. They're a hive made out of reeds, and the downside to the skep was every time we harvested honey, we killed all the bees. There's also no way to go in and inspect inside of the hive. By coming up with frames and using bee space as the model for developing this hive, we're now able to go in and essentially commercialize beekeeping. We're able to much more easily produce honey and harvest that honey. These hives move around readily throughout the country. You stack them on a pallet and they can go just about anywhere. By being able to pull the frames, and we're going to do this afternoon, it makes it easy to inspect the hive for disease, to look for the queen without killing the whole hive. With the skep and everything that preceded it, every time we harvested honey, we're basically destroying the hive. So this was a big change for beekeeping in about 1850. It's the most commonly used hive today, and it is certainly the hive you want to use if you have any designs on really making any quantity of honey. Other hives that I would recommend for anybody who's not as interested in making honey, but is more interested in just having bees in the garden, is think about the African top bar hive. The design is similar in that it uses a frame, but it only consists of a top bar, this one here, and the bees naturally will draw wax from it. It's really great if you just want to take a natural style of beekeeping. It is not so great if your intent is to make any quantity of honey. You will get some honey out of it, and it mostly comes as comb honey, but it's not something you're going to use as a commercial beekeeper, or if you do what I do, and I would be considered a small but scale beekeeper, and I make honey. I do have one top bar hive. It's up in Woodside with a client that pays me to keep her bees, and I have a gas with it. I mean, it's really an interesting and different way to raise bees, and that's why I like it. It's just something different to do. but the Langstroth hive is the most commonly used hive. You see it out in the valley. This is what the commercial beekeepers are using, and it consists of a number of parts. And we start pretty much at the bottom of the hive with a bottom board. This bottom board is screened. And it's screened for a couple of reasons. One is to help you manage the amount of varroa mite in your hive. The bees will groom each other, hopefully if they've got that type of behavior, and different bees are different. The varroa mite will fall off the bee, through the screen, and has a difficult time finding its way back up into the beehive. This also around here is important because it provides you with ventilation. Now you can use a solid bottom board. There's nothing that says you can't. But I happen to like the screen bottom board, so I always start with one of these on the bottom. And this is an entrance reducer. You're going to see when we go into the hive back here that I have a pretty good entrance reducer on there, and right now I'm using it because I've got some robbing going on. So other bees are trying to get into the hive and steal the honey. It's the time of year where we're out of the nectar flow, and bees are trying to get ready for the winter. In doing that, they're after anything sweet, and they will rob honey from each other's hives. That's why this is important. It helps you close down the entrance to your hive and help those bees defend their entrance. Okay? Then we come along with your first brood box. This is where you're going to initially get your bees started with a single brood box and a feeder. This is an entrance feeder. It's just one style of feeder. I'm going to show you another one as well. The feeder is going to be important when you get started because you're going to start your hive with frames that look like this. Now this is plastic foundation. You don't have to use plastic, you can use wax. Some people will use no foundation at all and let the bees just fill this in by themselves. But the first thing you need to do is get your bees to draw out wax. So once the queen emerges, she has some place to lay her eggs. And so the first thing you need to do is feed your bees, and this stimulates them to draw out wax. So you go from this to something that's going to look more like this. This is drawn comb. Up here I had foundation, down here it was empty. Either way they're going to fill it out. This is a specialized frame, again for helping control your varroa mite. It's called a Randy Oliver frame. You'll notice that the cells down here that the bees drew naturally are bigger than the cells up here that were on the foundation. Up here they follow the pattern, down here they do it on their own. The difference is, up here the queen will lay a fertile egg and produce a female worker bee. Down here she will lay an infertile egg which will turn into a male bee known as a drone, and by doing this we can again control the varroa mite. The varroa mite are attracted to the drones because the drones will drift from hive to hive, and that's how they spread in the environment. Every 21 days we come along, we cut this bunch of wax out, and we destroy it. And in doing so, we destroy all the varroa mite that were breeding inside the drone cells. Okay? This is basically where you're going to start your bees. You're going to feed, 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 assuming you have brand new equipment. Yeah.
How's the feeder feeding? I mean, how does that?
Bees will just basically crawl down in here.
So it's
This is
just
a
got
little
the hole at
ladder.
the top, and you put food in it, and they
That's
crawl out
right.
and grab it and climb out.
Feed a solution of sucrose and water in a ratio of about 1 cup of sugar to 1 cup of water. And that just stimulates, you're not really trying to feed your bees. You're trying to stimulate them to produce wax. So that once your queen is basically out of her own cage, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, she has some place to lay her eggs. She's coming out of her queen cage, gravid, fertilized, ready to start laying eggs. So if you're starting with the undrawn comb, she won't have any place to lay. So by feeding, the bees will draw out comb amazingly fast. I mean, within days they can hang literally sheets of comb. So once your queen is loose, she's laying eggs, you're going to keep feeding until this hive is about 80% full of bees, wax, drawn comb, and then you're going to come along and go to your second hive body. Most people will use 2 hive bodies. I've seen people do 1. What's important to note here is that I just give you what I do. You can get 3 beekeepers in a room, ask them 1 question, and they will give you 9 different answers, and none of them are necessarily wrong. So what I give you is the way I do it, what works for me, but there's lots of different ways to raise your bees. Start with what you want to achieve in mind, decide on the equipment you want to use, your own philosophy of keeping bees. If you want to take an all-natural approach, I very much encourage it. Other people will medicate. Commercial beekeepers almost have to medicate. They can't afford to lose 50 to 80% of their bees every year. If they do, folks, they're out of business. We're out of pollinators. We're out of about 2/3 of our fruits and vegetables. Bees are critical for the production of almonds in particular, melons, squashes, lettuce, berries, cherries, you name it. None of these things would be available to us if we didn't have honeybees and commercial beekeepers.